Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this talk. This is I Found the Fish in Pronunciation Quiz number 3, examining young learners' second language pronunciation in a game-informed site. So a little bit about this study. The goal was to determine the effect that a game-informed call system can have on second language pronunciation, and also to understand if and how a game-informed call system can contribute to study habits that include autonomy, repetition, and reflection. And this study took place in the distance setting in an online school with young Japanese learners. So to address these goals, I'm now going to talk about the constructs that inform this research, emphasizing game-informed approaches to learning and also second language pronunciation instruction. So a gameful experience is a psychological state that occurs when a person voluntarily works towards non-trivial achievable goals within a set of defined behavioral rules. Now, in second language learning, Reinhardt discussed, he refers to this as gameful second language teaching and learning. And he expresses that a key aspect of this is that both students and teachers must adopt a gameful attitude, both about the design of the learning materials and the use of them. And that's why he grounds it within a praxis perspective, which assumes that theory, research, and practice all contribute equally to developing and testing resources, which is one of the aims of this study. An important point is that a gameful experience can occur in a video game, but it can also occur outside of a game. And that's a key aspect of this, because now we can design learning materials that can hopefully trigger that same gameful psychological state that we refer to as a gameful experience. So we're looking specifically at game-informed call, which is applying games and play principles to contexts not typically associated with games. So language learning in this instance. And it's important to note that a distinction between game-informed approaches and gamification is that game-informed approaches a call also emphasize and highlight aspects that aren't clearly gameful. So whereas experience points and progress bars are clearly gameful, autonomy, controlling or altering time, repetition, which are key aspects of language learning, are also gameful. And as we'll be seeing in some of the examples, how the system encouraged these aspects as well. So looking at both sides of the game-informed elements. A key aspect is that these systems can only increase motivation if they're voluntary. So it needs to be up to the student. We can't force them to do something. And if the difficulty level is appropriate, if it's too difficult, then I can't make a system that's going to account for that gap. So it needs to target the right skill level. And with that in mind, it seems like pronunciation instruction, there's certain aspects of it that could be applied to game-informed design. So the goal of this study was to look at how to create a game-informed system that would increase all those positive study habits, but towards pronunciation practice. And so we looked at the goal of helping students to learn, Japanese speakers to learn R and L pronunciation. So Japanese speakers have a hard time with this. They do not differentiate the two sounds in Japanese, and so they perceive it as one sound, the tap, both in perception and production in English. So it was found that explicit phonetic information and form-focused instruction can lead to increased accuracy when producing R and L items. And explicit phonetic information is an exaggerated model of the target pronunciation. So moving your mouth slowly, and so the students can see your articulators to then mimic the sounds when they try to make them. And this can help lead to increased accuracy on pronunciation. So for example, if I was having them repeat the word lock, I would say lock, where they can really watch my mouth and then copy that. Now, in addition to pronunciation, also perception training is important, and that can actually lead to improved production without any specific focus on production. Listening discrimination is really important because it raises consciousness about the targeted features. So by using explicit phonetic information and doing listening exercises, students can learn about the target features and develop metaphonological awareness, which is a metalinguistic skill that focuses on second language pronunciation. So for example, learning how to position one's articulators to produce a specific segment. Now, this has been applied in a prior study to a game-informed system to help students develop metaphonological awareness to improve that LR pronunciation. So Barcombe and Cardoso developed a game-informed site to examine its pedagogical effectiveness on second language RL pronunciation. It included pronunciation videos that would give metalinguistic cues or help students to develop metaphonological awareness through explicit phonetic information. They did listening quizzes and a drawing activity where they would draw what their mouth looked like when making the target sounds. The results showed that learners improved at RL pronunciation and that they developed metaphonological awareness. Of equal importance was that students used the site autonomously and in a way that they perceived to be enjoyable. However, there were key limitations to this study. So there was not a control group. The sample size was small. It only went for 2 weeks. There was a lack of a delayed post-test. And the pronunciation materials did not provide the learners any immediate feedback about their pronunciation. So these are all limitations that are addressed in this study. Now, it's important to note that this study takes place within the communicative framework pronunciation instruction put forth by Celsi-Mersa et al. 2011. And the measurable outcomes are at steps 1 and 3. So at the description and analysis stage, show building metaphonological awareness at step 1 and controlled practice, reading short phrases to build awareness at step 3. There are listening discrimination activities, but there are no measurable outcomes for step 2. This study does not address guided practice or communicative practice steps 4 and 5. So let's turn our attention to the research questions now. What effect does a game-informed course have on the acquisition of RL? And this is broken into 3 sub-questions. Does the proposed game-informed environment contribute to metaphonological awareness, which is operationalized as being able to articulate the difference between how to make the 2 sounds? Does the proposed game-informed environment contribute to improved production or pronunciation of R and L? And what are users' perceptions of learning pronunciation in the proposed game-informed environment? So this study took place over the course of 10 weeks. At week 1, students were placed either in an experiment or control group and took the pre-test, the pre-pronunciation test for R and L. They then used the site for 6 weeks. The control group used just pronunciation. They just did a series of pronunciation materials if they chose to, and the experiment group could choose to do one in a game-informed environment that I'll be discussing. After 6 weeks, they took a pronunciation post-test and a short written questionnaire where they wrote responses about how they perceived different aspects of the course. 4 weeks later, at week 10, they both took a delayed pronunciation post-test. The participants included 31 Japanese L1 speakers. In the control group, there were 8 with a mean age of 10.2, and in the experiment group, 23 with a mean age of 11.7. They had no prior experience receiving explicit pronunciation instruction, and they were told that they would have the choice to participate in a bonus module about pronunciation. The context was in an online EFL school with small group webcam lessons, and they work in outside of class in a game-informed site that emphasizes speaking, where they're only rewarded points for doing speaking activities that prepare them to have conversations in the following lessons. So it's a distance setting flipped classroom. There's a need for explicit pronunciation instruction, but there's an overall lack of time to provide individual feedback during the lesson. So that's where the system also meets a pedagogical need for the online school. So the school breaks its year lessons into months, and each month students do 4 weeks of activities. So the first week they do a series of vocabulary and grammar lessons, and those prepare them to post in a video form. So each time they post in a video form, they receive 10 points, and they can make a maximum of 30 points per day, though they're encouraged to continue posting after that. And that teaches them also to practice English without the reward of points, so to differentiate them at some point. In the second week, they'll learn a new lesson, and same thing, then they have 2 different forms that they can post in. During the 3rd and 4th week, they have an assessment at the end of the month. And then after that, they can go and do a stash. So there's a scavenger hunt, and there are items that they can go back and find. They can go post, for example, they may need to post 8 times in the first form to find the fish here. Once they find it, they can click it and add it to their stash. And this all happens automatically. This is geared towards spaced repetition to keep the students studying consistently throughout the month. And every month points are reset and everyone starts over at the beginning of the new month, again, to encourage consistent study habits. Some of the elements that they're used to are experience points that go to a leaderboard. And there are progress bars that show their progress towards the next avatar. There are 10 levels of robot avatars and 50-point intervals. And then, as I mentioned before, there are scavenger hunts where they can locate items, again, encouraging review. And there's also a cheat guard that students can only gain 30 points per day, which again is to encourage consistent study habits. So Pronunciation Master is in this system. It's a 6-week module for students to practice RL pronunciation, and it's to build awareness of the features, listening discrimination, and controlled practice, which are the first 3 steps of the communicative framework. Students receive points, stash items, and avatars for completing the series of assignments I'll be discussing next. 8 students participated in did the same activities without any of the game-informed environment elements, but they were still able to achieve their points in the form, so they weren't at a competitive disadvantage in the game-informed system. They could still gain their 30 points a day, so it did not affect them in that way. All right. So the first activity is the description and analysis stage, and these are the videos that provide learners the meta-linguistic cues. So this is a Japanese L1 speaker showing the students how to move their mouth to make L, focusing on placing the tongue behind the alveolar ridge and watching it go down as you say a word, for example, lock. Our words focused on lip rounding and not when learners looked in the mirror or in their videos, not seeing their tongue when they made the when pronouncing our words. That then unlocked a listening discrimination quiz where it consisted of video and audio recordings, and they would have to select if the word began with L or R. That then unlocked the controlled practice. So this allowed students to do ASR, automated speech recognition activities, where they would click the button and say the word. This example was incorrect, so they got the immediate feedback that their pronunciation wasn't correct, where the second one was correct, and they also received that immediate feedback, which was a key limitation of Barcombe and Cardoso 2020. Those materials, the students only practiced alone, and they did not receive any feedback about their pronunciation. That then unlocked a drawing activity where learners would draw what their mouth looked like when making the target sounds. There were stash items that were set throughout the course. So in addition to each activity being worth 5 points each, the first time through the course, they would intermittently unlock a stash item. And then there were time released ones during the last week, which again was to encourage consistent study habits. And once again, none of these elements were present in the control group. To measure the outcomes, there was a pronunciation pre, post, and delayed post test with 42 items, broken down into 10 distractors and 32 RL items, 8 onset R singletons, 8 coda R singletons, 8 onset L singletons, and 8 coda L singletons, which were broken into 50% word and sentence level. So a word may be lip, and at the sentence level, it may be something like rip, I don't like that, where the word comes at the beginning of a carrier phrase. The accuracy of R and L pronunciation was assessed as accurate or inaccurate by the researcher and one assistant. There was also a written questionnaire that was, the goal is to determine how participants perceive learning pronunciation in the site. So the first question was, what was the strength of this site to learn English, and looking at what did they like about it. The second one was, what was the weakness of this site to learn English? And the third question was, do you feel that you learned English from this site? So let's look at the results. So looking at the metaphonological awareness in the game-informed group, there were a number of responses about how to move one's articulators. So the responses are 21 students mentioned something about how to move their tongue or how to move their mouth to make R and L sounds. So for example, one student saying, I remember about putting my tongue behind my front tooth for L and not putting my tongue behind my teeth for the R sound. When we look at, and then there's the drawing. So here's an example of one of the drawings that one of the students had completed. When we look at the control group, the 2 students did notice this. So 2 students watched the videos and did notice that they could remember how to move their tongue to make the L sound. But the 6 other participants did not note anything. For pronunciation tests, the results showed that there was a statistically significant interaction between the intervention on time and pronunciation scores. And there was a statistically significant effect of time on pronunciation and scores for the game-informed group. So when we look at this closely, we see that the scores were significantly different between the pre and post test by a mean score of 5.48 and significantly higher on the delayed post test when compared to the pre-test by a mean score of 4.83. There was not a statistically significant difference between the scores on the post test and delayed post test. And there were no significant effects of time on pronunciation and scores observed in the control group. Now, when we're looking at why this may be, we looked at the differences between the two groups and how they completed the activities. So the results here show that the game-informed group finished a mean total of 17.13 activities, where the control group was 6.5. So there was a statistically significant difference here between these two groups in the amount of materials, which may describe the pronunciation results. In addition to the total number of activities completed, we also did an independent t-test to look at the differences between the final week activities when the extra stash items were released. The game-informed group completed 3.3 activities on average more than the control group. On average 3.30 activities, where the control group was 0.38. And again, a statistically significant difference, indicating that these elements may have played a role and likely played a role in how they were using the materials. With regard to users' perceptions, the game-informed group noted that they liked competing and collecting experience points. So those gameful aspects I discussed in the lit review, that it contributed to repetition. So stash items motivated me to study more because I went back to study to find the stash items, and also some reflections. That one student noted that the items reminded him or her of pronunciation studying, or the points made me study more, but not caring about other people points, but looking at my own progress. So notable findings from the game-informed approaches. In the control group, it should be noted that there were some atypical game-informed approaches that were noted. Things happened automatically, and the instant feedback were both noted in the control group. So even those were not typical game-informed elements, that they were meaningful to those learners. They did take note of them. There were some weaknesses. The game-informed group explained that the pronunciation feedback was frustrating. The ASR feedback was not always accurate. And that some students found that to be, or many students, I should say, 15 found that to be frustrating. The stash items did not always appear on the first try. There was an error in the system, so students did not receive their stash items, and they found that to be frustrating. On the control group, one student noted that the pronunciation feedback did not work, so the same complaint. All right, looking at the discussion, let's turn our attention now and see metaphonological awareness. So if we look back at the communicative framework and we look at step one, we saw that metaphonological awareness is important, and it did increase, the students increased their accuracy. So it likely did play a role in increasing their intelligibility and comprehensibility. Metaphonological awareness is a very important aspect. So in this study, we saw the increase in accuracy, but it does in the long term lead to increases in intelligibility and comprehensibility. So a very important point. We see that listening discrimination can reduce frustration by raising consciousness, so that the learners did also those listening discrimination exercises plus watching the videos. And a key point is, in addition to the pronunciation benefits, that metaphonological awareness can also reduce learner anxiety and help them feel like they have more control over their pronunciation. Now, looking at the pronunciation or the production results, looking at controlled practice, the students worked on reading short phrases to build awareness, which targeted at improving in accuracy. So controlled practice can increase a learner's ability to process the target feature in short-term memory. And repeated rehearsal in a controlled context enables the use of the feature to become more automatic, which seems like we were able to see both of those in this study. And also not forgetting that the explicit phonetic information and form-focused instruction in the videos likely led to the ability to pronounce untrained items correctly. Now, looking at the game-informed approaches, the students reported many instances of gameful experience in their qualitative responses, for example, searching for scavenger hunt items. And many of the elements were not immediately recognizable as gameful, right? Competition, repetition, reflection, and autonomy. So whereas the scavenger hunt items may have been viewed as gameful, people may not notice the element of repetition and how important that is to second language acquisition, or autonomy, reflection, and competition, these other aspects. The game-informed system also encouraged spaced repetition and encouraged study habits, as we saw in the independent t-test with the final week results and the total activities completed in that final week. And this study did adopt a praxis perspective, as discussed by Reinhardt 2019, that research, theory, and practice worked in harmony between the teacher and the students, and what I think is a shared experience. There were some limitations, that the sample size was still relatively small. And also the study did not investigate RL accuracy and guided practice or communicative practice, which are both limitations that should be addressed in future research. So for future directions, the game-informed approaches, we saw that they're worthy of future investigation. So the approaches can contribute to the acquisition of second language phonology. And they can contribute to study habits that encourage autonomy, repetition, and reflection, as we saw throughout the study. In the future direction, I would also, in addition to the limitations I mentioned, want to look at an in-depth qualitative analysis of users' perceptions, including their interactions with the game-informed materials, such as an interview. And finally, I want to note that it's essential to maximize opportunities for pronunciation practice outside of the EFL classroom. And there are lots of low-cost and interactive ways, such as the ones in this study, that we can do to help students achieve this. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.